Daniel Whitmore was laughing. That was the first thing Emily heard when she opened the door to her own bedroom, her husband's laughter low and satisfied, like a man who had already won. He was holding a pen about to sign something, and the woman beside him was wearing Emily's silk robe, Emily's robe, on Emily's bed, in Emily's house, and Daniel was laughing. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you gave everything to stay with me, drop your city in the comments right now. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what Emily did next will change the way you think about power, loyalty, and what a woman is truly capable of when she finally stops being kind. Emily Caldwell had been on a plane for 11 hours. She had flown from New York to San Francisco, sat through 2 connecting delays, eaten a bag of pretzels that tasted like cardboard, and spent most of the flight reviewing quarterly reports she already had memorized. She was tired in the way that only certain kinds of tired feel, not just in the body, but somewhere deeper in the place behind your eyes where all your patience lives. She had decided to come home early. It was supposed to be a surprise. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel had told her during dinner, their weekly dinner, the one he almost always canceled, that he wished she traveled less. He had reached across the table and touched her hand and said, "I miss you when you're gone, Em. The house feels empty." She had believed him. So she called her assistant from the plane, rescheduled the final meeting in New York for the following week, and spent the last hour of the flight thinking about what she would cook for dinner. She thought about whether Daniel still liked that lemon chicken pasta she used to make in the early years. She thought about opening a good bottle of wine, the Cabernet they had been saving since their anniversary. She thought about surprising him about the look on his face when she walked through the door. She thought about those things all the way home. The car from the airport took her through the winding hills above the Pacific, past the iron gates of the Caldwell estate, her family's estate, the one her father built before she was born, and up the long driveway lined with the oak trees her mother had planted decades ago. The lights in the villa were on. Emily noticed that Daniel's car was in the garage. She noticed that there was another car beside it, a silver sedan she did not recognize. She noticed a light in the upstairs master bedroom, and she registered that something was different about the way the house felt, the way a house can feel like a different place, even before you understand why. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself she was tired, that 11 hours of travel had made her imagination work overtime. She went inside. The foyer was quiet. The housekeeper had gone home. The kitchen was dark except for the light above the stove that Emily always left on, as a habit the way her mother had taught her. She set her bag down on the hallway table. She slipped off her shoes. She started up the stairs. The laughter reached her before she opened the door. It was Daniel's laugh. She knew his laugh the way she knew her own name. She had been listening to that laugh for 12 years, first at a charity gala, where they had been introduced by mutual friends, then across dinner tables, across boardroom meetings, across the breakfast table every morning for a decade of marriage. She knew that laugh, but she had never heard it sound like that. There was a quality to it she could not immediately name. Relaxed, careless. The laughter of a man who believed he was completely alone, who had no reason to be careful. Emily's hand was on the door handle. She stood there for exactly 3 seconds. She counted them later in the way that your mind counts things during moments it will never forget. 1, 2, 3. She opened the door. The first thing she saw was the woman. She was young. Emily would later learn she was 26 years old, with dark hair loose around her shoulders, and she was wearing a robe. Emily recognized the robe immediately. It was the silk one, the deep burgundy one with the gold embroidery along the collar, the one Emily had bought in Milan 2 years ago and brought home carefully wrapped in tissue paper because the color was too beautiful to risk. She had worn it exactly 4 times. She knew every stitch of it. The woman was wearing it like it cost nothing. She was sitting on the edge of the bed with her legs crossed, holding a glass of red wine, looking at Daniel with an expression Emily could only describe as ownership. Not attraction, not affection. Ownership. The way you look at something that already belongs to you. Daniel was sitting at the writing desk near the window. He had a pen in his hand and a folder open in front of him. He had not yet seen Emily. He was still laughing at something the woman had said, his head tilted back slightly the way it always did when he was genuinely amused. He looked relaxed. He looked comfortable. He looked like a man in his own home, in Emily's home. Emily did not say anything. She stood in the doorway and looked at her husband and the woman wearing her robe, and she felt something move through her that she could not call by any ordinary name. It was not surprise exactly. It was something colder than surprise and deeper, like the ground shifting under a house that looked solid from the outside. And then Daniel turned around. The laughter stopped. There is a particular quality to silence that falls after laughter. It is heavier than regular silence. It lands differently. This silence fell into the room like something physical, and Emily felt it hit her, and she still did not speak. Daniel stood up. He was wearing a white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled to the elbows. He was holding the pen. He looked at his wife standing in the doorway of their bedroom, and the first emotion that crossed his face was not guilt. It was irritation. Emily. He said her name the way he said it when she interrupted a phone call or walked into his office during a meeting. Flat. Slightly put out, like she was an inconvenience. "You're home early," he said. "Not I'm sorry. Not let me explain. Not what are you doing here. You're home early." Emily looked at the woman on the bed who had straightened up and was watching everything with the careful attention of someone who had prepared for this moment. She looked at Daniel, who was setting the pen down on the desk with a deliberate calmness that made something tighten in Emily's chest. She looked at the folder on the desk. "What is that?" Emily said. Her voice came out quieter than she expected. Quieter and more steady, and she would think about that steadiness for a long time afterward. She had expected to hear herself shake. She didn't. Daniel glanced at the folder. Something moved in his expression the briefest flinch quickly covered. "It's a business document," he said. "Emily, this isn't what—" "Don't." She said it simply without heat, just the single word. "Don't say that to me." She walked into the room. The woman on the bed. Vanessa, though. Emily did not know her name yet, uncrossed her legs and sat up straighter. Emily ignored her completely. She walked to the desk and picked up the folder. She opened it. The first page was a legal document. The letterhead was from a firm Emily did not recognize, which was wrong because Emily knew every law firm that handled company affairs. The language was dense and formal, the way legal language always is when it is trying to hide something inside its complexity. But Emily had spent her adult life reading documents like this, and her father had spent her childhood teaching her how. She read the first paragraph. She read it again. And then she understood what it was. It was a transfer agreement, a signed transfer agreement requiring her signature that would move her controlling interest in the Caldwell family. Holdings, the company her father had built over 40 years, the company she had managed and protected through 3 recessions and 2 market crashes and 1 global pandemic, to Daniel Whitmore. For $1. For $1. Emily set the folder down on the desk. She set it down slowly and carefully, the way you set down something fragile, and she looked at her husband. "How long?" she said. Daniel opened his mouth. "How long have you been planning this?" she said. "Emily, I need you to listen to me. This is more complicated than it looks. The company has serious issues that you don't understand, and I've been trying to protect. I drafted the company's most recent restructuring plan," Emily said. "I negotiated the Pacific Coast merger in 2019. I rebuilt our board after the fraud investigation in 2021. I have been the operational backbone of this company for 12 years while you held the title and took the credit. Do not tell me what I don't understand about the company I inherited." Silence. Daniel stared at her, and then slowly he made a choice. She watched him make it. She watched his expression shift from defensive to dismissive, and she knew exactly what it meant. He had decided that she was emotional. He had decided that he could manage this. He had decided, as he had decided so many times across the years of their marriage, that Emily Caldwell could be handled. "Vanessa," he said without looking away from Emily, "could you give us a minute?" The woman on the bed stood. She smoothed the front of the silk robe, Emily's silk robe, and walked out of the bedroom with the unhurried ease of someone who intended to come back. When the door closed, Daniel sighed. He sighed like a man facing an exhausting task he had been putting off. "I was going to tell you," he said. "I was going to sit down with you and explain everything properly. You weren't supposed to find out like this." "Tell me what exactly," Emily said. "That you've been having an affair with my assistant, that you drafted a fraudulent document to steal my family's company, or that you planned to do it while I was traveling so you would have time to file before I returned." The last question surprised him. She saw it in his face. "That's right," Emily said. "I know what the filing deadline is. I know you needed my signature by Friday. I know exactly what this document is and what it would have done and why you needed me out of the state to do it." Daniel took a slow breath. "You're angry," he said. "That's understandable, but you're letting your emotions—" "I'm not angry," Emily said. He stopped. She looked at him, really looked at him the way she had not looked at him in years, the way you stop looking at someone when you've gotten so used to them that you've forgotten to actually see them. She looked at his face, which was handsome in the careful, maintained way of men who pay attention to their appearance because they understand its value. She looked at his eyes, which were waiting for her to cry or scream or beg, because those were the options he had prepared for. "I'm not angry," she said again. "I'm awake." She reached into her jacket pocket and took out her phone. Daniel frowned. "What are you doing?" Emily pressed record. "What are you doing?" he said again, sharper. "Finishing something," she said. He moved toward her. Emily put the phone down. "Stay where you are, Daniel." "I'm serious. Put the phone." "So am I." Something in her voice stopped him. He stood in the middle of the room and looked at his wife, and for the first time all evening, something flickered in his eyes that was not irritation or confidence or calculated patience. It was uncertainty. Emily walked slowly around the room. She filmed the folder on the desk. She filmed the wine glasses, the second glass still on the bedside table with lipstick on the rim. She filmed the divorce papers she found beneath the transfer agreement. Yes, those two, already drafted, already prepared, a full legal dissolution that left Emily with a settlement so carefully minimized it was nearly an insult. She filmed it all, unhurried, thorough. Then she looked up at her husband. "You want the company," she said. "You want Vanessa. You want the divorce. You've been planning this for how long? 6 months, a year. Emily, don't." Again, that single word, quiet as a closed door. She picked up the folder and tucked it under her arm. "You never understood this house," she said. Daniel blinked. Of all the things she might have said, this was clearly not what he expected. "What? This house," she said. "You lived in it for 10 years, but you never understood it. You never asked who built it, or why, or what was in the foundation." She walked toward the door. "Emily." His voice followed her. There was an edge in it now, the beginning of something urgent. "Emily, we need to talk about this. If you do something rash right now, you're going to make things much worse for yourself. Think about what you're doing. Think about the company. Think about what I can do." She paused at the door. She did not turn around. "The last time I underestimated what you could do," she said. "I almost lost everything my father built." She pulled the door open. "It won't happen again." She walked out. She walked down the long hallway past the photographs on the wall, her parents on their wedding day, her father shaking hands with the first contractor he ever hired her, first board meeting at 24, her wedding portrait with Daniel, which she passed without stopping, and she walked down the stairs into the foyer where her bag was still sitting on the table. She picked up the bag. She walked into her father's study, the room Daniel had repainted 3 years ago and turned into a home office for himself, not knowing that the room still operated on its original systems, the ones installed by Robert Caldwell 22 years ago, the ones that had never been disconnected because Emily had made sure of it. She sat down at the desk, she opened her laptop, and she began. The first call was to Martin Cole, her father's oldest attorney, who answered on the second ring even at 11 o'clock at night because he had been taking calls from Caldwell's at odd hours for 30 years and had never once complained about it. "Martin," Emily said. "Emily." His voice was the voice of a man who heard something in her tone immediately. "Tell me what happened." She told him, concisely, efficiently, without crying. She described the document, the transfer agreement, the $1, the timeline, the signatures that had already been prepared, the filing deadline. She described finding Daniel with Vanessa. She described the recording on her phone. Martin was quiet for a moment. "Send me the recording," he said, "and photograph every page of that folder. Don't let it out of your hands." "Already done," Emily said. Another pause. "Your father," Martin said carefully, "put certain protections in place when he set up the family trust. Certain provisions that would become active under specific circumstances. We've never had to use them before." "I know," Emily said. "Emily, are you certain you want to do this once we begin?" "He had divorce papers already drafted," Emily said. "He had a settlement prepared that valued my contribution to this marriage at a number I will not repeat to you on the phone because it would insult us both. He was going to file for the share transfer on Friday. He had a mistress in my bedroom wearing my clothes. Martin was quiet. He laughed, Emily said. When I walked in before he saw me, he was laughing. The sound of Martin Cole exhaling slowly came through the phone. I'll have the protection clauses active by morning, he said. Thank you, Martin. Get some sleep. I will. She ended the call. She did not sleep. Instead, she spent this next 3 hours doing something she had learned from her father long before she learned it in any boardroom. She built a structure. She gathered everything, every document, every financial record she could access, every email trail she had ever preserved out of instinct, every piece of the picture she had been assembling without quite knowing she was assembling it. Because here was the thing about Emily Caldwell that Daniel Whitmore had never understood. She paid attention. She had always paid attention. She had paid attention to the consulting firm invoices that appeared 2 years ago. Vendors, she did not recognize services, she could not verify payments that Daniel signed off on without bringing to the board. She had filed those questions in the back of her mind and told herself she was being suspicious, told herself she was letting old anxiety create problems where none existed. She stopped telling herself that tonight. She pulled the financial records. She started with the invoices she remembered and traced them forward, and what she found in those 3 quiet hours made the transfer agreement look almost minor. There were 4 shell companies. She found 3 of them in the first hour and the 4th by 2 in the morning. Entities that existed on paper, registered in states with minimal disclosure requirements that had been receiving payments from Whitmore Global Holdings for 18 months. Payments totaling just over $4 million. She sat with that number for a moment. $4 million. She thought about the year she had fought the board to extend health coverage to the company's part-time employees. She thought about the quarterly meetings where Daniel had presented austerity budgets and explained that certain departments needed to tighten their spending. She thought about the employees who had been told there was no room in the budget for raises. She thought about $4 million moving quietly into companies that did not exist. She picked up her phone and called her own private accountant, a woman named Sarah Brennan, who also kept unusual hours and who had been Emily's financial advisor for 8 years. I need you to look at some records, Emily said when Sarah answered. Now, Sarah said, and she did not sound surprised, only focused, because that was Sarah's nature. Now, Emily said. She sent the files while they were still on the phone. She listened to Sarah's breathing change as she read through them. She listened to the short, sharp exhale when Sarah found the 4th entity. Emily, Sarah said. I know. I know. Do you have an attorney on this already, about Martin Cole? Good. A pause. Emily, whoever helped him set this up, knew what they were doing. These structures are careful, but they're not careful enough. No, Emily said. They're not. He must have had help from inside the company, Sarah said. You don't build something like this alone. Emily thought about Vanessa Reed in her silk robe. She thought about the way Vanessa had looked at Daniel when Emily walked in, not afraid, not surprised, but attentive, strategic. The look of someone who was watching a plan unfold and tracking each development. I know who helped him, Emily said. She ended the call and sat in the dark study and thought about the woman upstairs. She thought about what it meant to choose to help someone steal from the person who trusted them. She thought about what it meant to look a man in the eye and decide that helping him was worth everything it cost. She thought about what Vanessa Reed stood to gain, and then because Emily had always been better at strategy than she ever let people know, she thought about what Vanessa Reed stood to lose. At 3 in the morning, something shifted. Emily had been sitting in her father's study for 4 hours, and she had the financial records, and she had the recording, and she had Martin, and she had Sarah, and she had 12 years of careful attention that Daniel had mistaken for passivity. She had all of it arranged in front of her like pieces of something that was beginning to make sense. But something was still wrong. She could feel it, the way you feel a word you cannot quite remember, hovering at the edge of understanding. She went back to the transfer agreement. She read it again slowly this time with her full attention on the legal language, rather than the emotional reality of it. She was looking for something specific, something Martin had mentioned once, a provision in the family trust that her father had insisted on including over his lawyer's objection, something Robert Caldwell had called his insurance policy. And there it was. Buried in Section 14 of the original trust documentation, which she had pulled from her secure files, was a clause her father had drafted with the kind of patient fury that only a man who had been betrayed himself could produce. The clause was simple. In the event of any attempt to transfer Caldwell family trust assets under conditions of fraud, coercion, or breach of fiduciary duty, all trust-associated properties and their attached systems would automatically revert to the authority of the primary trust beneficiary. Emily was the primary trust beneficiary. She had always been the primary trust beneficiary. She looked up at the ceiling of her father's study, and she thought about the conversation she'd had with him 2 weeks before he passed, when he had held her hand in the hospital and said, "I built you a house that will always know who it belongs to. Don't forget that." She had thought it was grief talking. She had thought it was a father's sentiment. She understood now that it was architecture. Emily opened the estate management system on her laptop. The one Daniel had never asked about, had never tried to access, because Daniel assumed that anything technical in the house had been set up by IT contractors and was therefore beneath his interest. He had never asked who originally built the system. He had never asked who maintained it. He had never asked Emily. He had never asked Emily much of anything, really. She entered her credentials. The system recognized her immediately. She looked at the control panel for the house she had grown up in, the house her father built, the house she had brought her husband to 10 years ago because she loved him and wanted to share the things she loved. She thought about him laughing. She thought about the silk robe. She thought about $4 million. She thought about the employees who had been told there was no money for raises. She moved to the security administration panel. Her hands were steady on the keyboard. Her face was calm. She was not operating from anger. She was operating from something much more precise, much more deliberate, and much more permanent. She began to type. The security reassignment took 11 minutes. At the end of those 11 minutes, the villa's systems reflected a new administrative structure. Daniel Whitmore's access credentials, every keypad code, every biometric scan, every digital entry point in the estate were suspended. The codes he had used for 10 years no longer existed in the system. The doors that had opened for him since the first year of their marriage were now deaf to his hand. Every screen in the house, and there were many, because her father had believed in comprehensive monitoring, displayed the same message. Ownership authority reassigned. Primary beneficiary active. Emily closed the laptop. She sat in the study for a moment in the deep quiet of the house. From somewhere upstairs she heard the sound of footsteps, Daniel moving, then the sound of a door, and then the muffled sound of his voice saying something urgent to Vanessa. Then after a pause, the sound of a keypad being pressed, and pressed again, and then silence. Emily picked up her phone and sent a single message to Martin Cole. The message said, "It's done. Be ready for Friday." Martin responded in less than a minute. His message said Robert would be proud. Emily set the phone face down on the desk. She thought about her father. She thought about a man who had spent 40 years building something worth protecting and who had understood with the specific wisdom of someone who had been tested by the world that the most important thing you could give your daughter was not wealth or prestige or beauty. It was the architecture to protect herself. She thought about what Daniel had said to her in the bedroom. "You're going to make things worse for yourself." She almost smiled. Daniel Whitmore had spent 12 years living in this house. He had eaten breakfast at the kitchen table and worked in the study her father built and slept in the bedroom at the top of the stairs. He had learned the rooms and the hallways and the way the light came through the west windows in the afternoon. But he had never understood the foundation. That was his mistake, not the affair. Not the fraud, not the arrogance of a man who believed his borrowed power was his own. The mistake was simpler than all of that. He had looked at a woman who paid attention to everything and decided, because she was quiet about it, that she was not paying attention at all. He had looked at kindness and called it weakness. He had looked at patience and called it passivity. He had looked at a woman who was learning the business world with the same careful thoroughness with which she learned everything, and he had decided she was decorative. And when a man decides a woman is decorative, he stops watching what she does with her hands. Emily had done a great deal with her hands. In the study her father built in the house that had always belonged to her family, Emily Caldwell sat in the 3 a.m. quiet and felt the shape of what came next. Upstairs her husband was pressing keypad buttons that no longer worked. He was about to discover that the CEO of Whitmore Global Holdings had absolutely no authority over a house he had never owned. The battle as he understood it was over. The battle Emily was planning had not yet begun. She reached for her coffee cup, found it empty, and stood to go make another. She had a great deal of work left to do, and for the first time in a very long time, she was not tired at all. The clock on the wall of her father's study read 3:47 in the morning when Emily heard Daniel's footsteps on the stairs. Not hurrying, not running. The slow, deliberate steps of a man who had decided to come down and have a conversation on his terms, because that was how Daniel Whitmore handled every situation that did not go according to his plan. He reframed it. He repositioned himself. He walked into the room like he owned it and started talking until the other person forgot that he was the one who had done something wrong. Emily had watched him do it in boardrooms. She had watched him do it with investors, with attorneys, with employees who came to him with legitimate grievances and left somehow feeling like they owed him an apology. She had watched him do it to her more times than she could count. She did not look up from her laptop when he walked in. "Emily." His voice was calibrated, calm, the voice he used when he wanted to seem reasonable. "It's almost 4 in the morning. Come to bed." She kept typing. "We need to talk about this like adults," he said. "What happened tonight, I know it looks bad. I know you're hurt. But if you'll just let me explain the situation with the company, I think you'll understand that what I was trying to do was actually protect." "The keypad on the master suite isn't working," Emily said. Silence. "What did you do to the keypad?" he said. "Nothing permanent," she said, which was not entirely true, but was close enough to true that she felt comfortable saying it. "The system reset. It happens sometimes with older infrastructure." She heard him breathe. "Emily, you should get some sleep, Daniel. You have a long few days ahead of you." Another pause. Longer this time. "What does that mean?" he said. She finally looked up at him. She looked at him the way she had been looking at balance sheets all night, with complete clarity, without sentiment tracking, only what was real. "It means you should get some sleep," she said. He stared at her for a long moment. And then, because Daniel Whitmore had the particular intelligence of a man who knew when a room had shifted against him, even if he did not yet know how, he turned and walked back upstairs without another word. Emily listened to his footsteps on the stairs. She turned back to her laptop. She had 3 hours left before Martin needed the first set of documents, and she intended to use every minute of them. By 6 in the morning, Emily had built what she privately thought of as the architecture of truth. It was not dramatic. It was not emotional. It was simply a complete picture assembled from records and receipts and digital trails that Daniel had apparently believed were too small for anyone to bother following. 4 shell companies, 18 months of payments, $4,230,000 moved through entities that existed only on paper in states where paper was enough. She thought about the employees again. She thought about Marcus Webb, the head of operations, who had come to her 6 months ago with a quiet desperation in his eyes and said his department had been told there was no budget for the software upgrade. They needed the one that would have cut his team's workload by 30%. She thought about how she had gone to Daniel with that request, and Daniel had sighed and said the numbers just weren't there right now. Emily and she had believed him. She picked up her phone and sent a message to Sarah Brennan. The message said, "I need a full audit trail for all 4 entities. I need it formatted for board presentation. I need it by Thursday morning." Sarah's response came back in 4 minutes. It said, "Already started. Emily, there may be a 5th." Emily stared at that message for a long time. A 5th. She typed back, "Find it." At 7:15, Vanessa Reed came downstairs. Emily heard her before she saw her, the unfamiliar sound of footsteps that were not Daniel's, and not the housekeeper's, lighter and more cautious, stopping at the bottom of the stairs. Emily did not look up. She waited. After a moment, Vanessa appeared in the doorway of the study. She was no longer wearing the silk robe. She was dressed in her own clothes now, a blouse and dark trousers, and she was carrying her bag over one shoulder in the way of someone who was prepared to leave quickly. She looked younger in the morning light than she had the night before. She looked tired. She looked like a person who had spent the night lying awake next to someone and realizing that what she had signed up for and what she had actually gotten were 2 different things. Emily looked at her. "Sit down," Emily said. Vanessa hesitated. "I'm not asking," Emily said, not aggressively, just clearly. Vanessa sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Emily studied the younger woman the way she had studied the financial documents, looking for structure, looking for what was real beneath the surface. "How long?" Emily said. Vanessa met her eyes. 14 months. And the companies, the consulting firms, something shifted in Vanessa's expression, a quick involuntary tension around the eyes. "I don't know what you're—" "Vanessa." Emily's voice was quiet and completely immovable. "I have the financial records. I have the incorporation documents. I have the payment trails. I have 14 months of internal emails that I pulled from the company server at 3 this morning because I have administrative access that Daniel apparently forgot I maintained. I know about the shell companies. I know about the $4 million. I know your name appears on 2 of the incorporation documents as a registered agent." The color left Vanessa's face. "So," Emily said, "I'm going to ask you again. The companies, how involved were you?" The silence stretched. Outside, the first birds were starting. The world was beginning its ordinary morning, completely indifferent to the fact that Emily Caldwell's life had broken open overnight. "He told me it was a tax structure," Vanessa said finally. Her voice had changed. The careful composure was gone. What was underneath it was younger, more frightened, and Emily noted more honest. "He said it was a legal optimization strategy, that the company's accountants had approved it, that it was the kind of thing large companies do all the time. He gave me the paperwork to sign and told me it was routine." "And you believed him," Emily said. Vanessa looked down at her hands. "I believed him about a lot of things." Emily studied her face. She had spent 12 years learning to read the difference between a lie that had been prepared and a truth that hurt to say. What she saw on Vanessa Reed's face was the second thing. "Were you in love with him?" Emily asked. The question surprised Vanessa. She looked up quickly, and something crossed her face that was too complicated and too raw to be performed. "I thought I was," she said. Emily nodded slowly. "He told you what?" she said. "That the marriage was over, that I was difficult, that you were the person who actually understood him." Vanessa's jaw tightened slightly, not with anger, with recognition. "He said you had grown apart," she said. "He said you were more interested in the company than in him. He said I was cold," Emily said. Vanessa didn't answer, which was its own answer. Emily almost laughed, not with bitterness, with the particular exhaustion of a woman who has just heard the oldest story in the world told back to her from the other side. "Let me tell you something about Daniel Whitmore," Emily said. "He is one of the most gifted storytellers I have ever known, not in the creative sense, in the functional sense. He understands very precisely what each person in a room needs to hear, and he tells them exactly that thing, and he tells it so well that you spend years not noticing that the story changes, depending on who's listening." Vanessa was very still. "What did he tell you about the transfer agreement?" Emily asked. Another pause, longer. "He said it was a protective measure," Vanessa said slowly. "He said the family trust had structural vulnerabilities and that transferring the controlling shares to him was the only way to protect the company from a potential hostile takeover. He said you had agreed to it in principle, but that you kept delaying the paperwork because you had trouble letting go of control." Emily absorbed this. The precision of it was almost impressive. Every element of the lie had been designed to neutralize the specific objection Vanessa might have raised. Of course Emily would be suspicious. Of course the transfer looked alarming on its face. But here was the explanation, tidy and reasonable, that made the alarm feel like Emily's problem rather than Daniel's plan. "I never agreed to any transfer," Emily said, "in principle or otherwise." Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. "I know that now," she said. "Vanessa." Emily leaned forward slightly. "I need you to listen to me very carefully because what I'm about to say is important, and I'm only going to say it once. I'm not your enemy. I have every reason in the world to treat you like one, and I'm choosing not to, but that choice has a limited window. The window is right now in this room in the next 5 minutes. After this conversation, the legal process begins, and once it begins, every piece of your involvement in those shell companies becomes part of a formal record. Your name on those incorporation documents becomes evidence, and depending on how that evidence is presented, you are looking at potential liability for financial fraud that carries serious consequences." Vanessa had gone very still. However, Emily said. "If you came to me right now today before the legal process, fully engaged with documentation of your own, the emails, the instructions Daniel gave you, the timeline of what he asked you to do and when, if you came with that, the picture changes considerably, because then you're not a co-conspirator. You're a witness." Vanessa stared at her. "You're giving me a choice," she said. "I'm giving you a window," Emily said. "There's a difference." The silence was the longest one yet. Then Vanessa reached into her bag. She pulled out her phone. She scrolled for a moment, then she turned the screen to face Emily. It was an email chain. The first email was dated 16 months ago. The sender was Daniel Whitmore. The subject line was simply her name, Vanessa, and the message below it began with a request framed as a casual administrative task to set up a consulting entity in Delaware using a list of parameters he had attached. Emily looked at the email. She looked at the date. She looked at the careful, reasonable language Daniel had used to make fraud sound like paperwork. She looked up at Vanessa. "I need all of it," Emily said. "Every email, every instruction, every document he asked you to sign. I need it in a format my attorney can use." "And in exchange," Vanessa said. "In exchange," Emily said, "when the board meeting happens, your name appears as a cooperating witness, not a defendant." Vanessa Reed sat in the study of Robert Caldwell's house, in the chair that had been Robert Caldwell's chair, and looked at the daughter who had inherited not just the house and the company, but the particular quality of patience that made powerful people dangerous. "Okay," Vanessa said. "Okay," Emily said. She picked up her phone and called Martin Cole. The second call she made that morning was to a woman named Patricia Huang, who ran the board's independent audit committee, and who had the specific kind of integrity that is rare in corporate governance, the kind that was not theoretical but operational, meaning that Patricia had actually used it before in situations where using it had cost her something. Emily and Patricia had never been close. They were collegial in the careful way of women in the same industry who respect each other without having had the time or occasion to become friends. But Emily had watched Patricia vote against Daniel's proposed board restructuring 2 years ago, quietly and without drama, and she had noted it the way she noted everything. "Patricia," Emily said when the call connected, "I need 20 minutes of your time this morning. I have something you need to see before the board is briefed." A pause. Patricia Huang was not the kind of person who responded to vague urgency without a reason. "What kind of something?" Patricia said. "Financial records," Emily said, "and a legal document that Daniel Whitmore intended to file on Friday." Another pause, shorter. "I'll be there at 9, Patricia said. Emily set the phone down. Vanessa, who had been sitting quietly through both calls, looked up. "He's going to know something is happening," she said. "When he wakes up and sees me gone, he'll start making calls." "He's already making calls," Emily said. "He's been awake since 6. I heard him on the phone at 6:30. Vanessa frowned. "You can hear the calls." "The study's audio monitoring system was installed by my father in 2001, Emily said. "It covers the entire ground floor and the upstairs hallway. Daniel has slept in this house for 10 years and never asked why the house manager needed a monitoring system. He assumed it was for security purposes." "Isn't it?" Emily looked at her steadily. "It's for all kinds of purposes," she said. She pulled up the audio file from 6:30 and pressed play. Daniel's voice came through the laptop speaker and even filtered through a recording system. The energy in it was unmistakable. Tite controlled the voice of a man managing a crisis with the practiced efficiency of someone who had managed crises before. "I need the filing moved up," he was saying. "Today, if possible. She came back early. She has the folder. Listen to me, Richard. I need this filed before she gets an attorney involved because once—" Emily paused the recording. Vanessa stared at the laptop. "Richard," she said slowly. "Richard Cahill, Daniel's attorney." "Yes," Emily said. "He's the one who drafted the transfer agreement," Vanessa said. Her voice had taken on a different quality, the voice of someone watching dominoes fall in sequence. "He's the one who told Daniel the filing would be bulletproof." "Richard Cahill is going to have a very interesting Thursday," Emily said. She closed the audio file and turned back to her laptop. She had 4 hours before Patricia Huang arrived, and she intended to have a complete presentation ready, not an emotional one, not a personal one, but a precise and documented account of 18 months of financial misconduct that no board member could look at and choose to ignore. She started building it. At 8:15, Daniel came downstairs. How was dressed? Suit tie, the full armor of a man who had decided the best defense was complete normality. He walked into the kitchen, and Emily heard him open the coffee maker, and she heard the particular pause that meant he had noticed something was different about the house, the way the air sat, the way a space feels when it has been occupied by purpose all night. He came to the doorway of the study. He looked at Emily. He looked at Vanessa, who was sitting across the desk from Emily with her phone on the table between them, and an expression he could not immediately read. The color shifted in his face. "Vanessa," he said. His voice was perfectly neutral. "I thought you were getting ready to leave." "She decided to stay for coffee," Emily said without looking up from the laptop. Silence. "Emily." His voice dropped. A warning. "Daniel, I have a meeting at 9, Emily said. "I'll need you out of the house by 8:45. The gate code has been updated, so if you need to come back for anything, I'll need to let you in manually." "This is my house," he said. "The property record of the Caldwell estate," Emily said, "filed with the Santa Clara County Assessor's Office, lists the primary owner as the Caldwell Family Trust, of which I am the sole beneficiary. You are listed as a resident by virtue of spousal arrangement. That arrangement is currently under legal review." She heard him exhale. "You called an attorney," he said. "I called my father's attorney," she said, "at 11 o'clock last night, while you were upstairs pressing keypad buttons that no longer worked." The silence was different now, harder. She could feel his recalculation happening from across the room, the rapid, practiced reassessment of a man who prided himself on being 3 moves ahead and had just discovered he was behind. "We need to talk," he said, privately. "I don't think we do," Emily said. "I think everything that needs to be said between us at this stage should be said through attorneys. Martin Cole's office will contact Richard Cahill today. I would suggest you let Richard know that the filing he was asked to expedite this morning will not be happening." The pause that followed was long enough that Emily finally looked up. Daniel was standing in the doorway with his jaw tight and his hands very still at his sides, and she could see him actually deciding in real time which version of himself to deploy. The reasonable husband, the wounded man, the powerful executive who had not come this far by losing. He chose the executive. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. "You think this is about us, about our marriage, about a mistake I made. It's not. There are things happening with this company that you don't have the full picture on, and if you blow this up right now based on incomplete information, you're going to destroy something that 3,000 employees depend on for their livelihoods. Is that what you want? Is that what Robert Caldwell built this company for?" How was good? Emily acknowledged it internally. He was very good. He had taken the thing she cared most about, the employees, the company her father built, and he had placed it in front of himself like a shield. She looked at him for a moment. "Do you know what my father told me?" she said. "The first time I watched him fire someone for financial misconduct. I was 22. I was in his office, and the man he fired had worked for him for 15 years, and afterward I asked him how he did it, how he made himself do something that hard." Daniel waited. "He said the company is only worth protecting if it's worth being honest about," Emily said. "He said the moment you start lying to protect it, you've already lost the thing you were trying to save." She closed the laptop. "I know about the $4 million, Daniel," she said. "I know about all 4 companies. I know about Richard Cahill's involvement. I know about the timeline. I know about the filing you wanted expedited this morning." She paused. "And as of about 40 minutes ago, I know there may be a 5th entity we haven't fully traced yet." Something broke through the executive's composure. Just for a moment, just a flicker. "You're bluffing," he said. Emily picked up her phone and turned the screen to face him. It was Sarah Brennan's most recent message. 5th entity confirmed. Registered in Wyoming. First payment 14 months ago. Total transferred $640,000 additional. Daniel stared at the screen. $4,870,000, Emily said. "Give or take, Sarah is still working through the final quarter." The room was completely quiet. Vanessa was not looking at Daniel. She was looking at her hands, and her expression was the expression of someone who has just fully comprehended the dimensions of a thing they were part of without fully understanding. Daniel looked at his wife, and for the first time since she had walked through the bedroom door the night before, Emily saw something in his face that was not calculated, not performed, not strategic. He looked afraid. Good, she thought. She did not say it. She thought it. "The board meeting," he said quietly. "Emily, if this goes to the board. Patricia Huang arrives at 9 o'clock, Emily said. His face changed completely. Patricia Huang, chair of the Independent Audit Committee. The one board member Daniel had never been able to manage, never been able to charm, never been able to work around, because Patricia operated from a set of principles that were not negotiable, and that Daniel had spent 2 years carefully avoiding rather than confronting. "You called Patricia," he said. "I called Patricia," Emily said. He straightened. He was still trying. She watched him try, and she felt something that was not triumph and not satisfaction, but was close to the feeling of watching a structure you built hold its weight under pressure. "Think about what you're doing," he said. "One last time." The words of a man who has only one card left and knows it. "Think about our marriage. Think about everything we built together. Think about whether you really want to do this." Emily looked at her husband. She thought about 12 years. She thought about charity events and quarterly reports and Sunday mornings and the lemon chicken pasta she had been thinking about on the plane. She thought about trust and what it cost and what it was worth and what happened to the person who gave it to someone who treated it like a resource to be spent. She thought about her father saying your kindness was never your weakness. She thought about Daniel laughing. "I already did this," she said quietly. "I did it at 3 o'clock this morning while you were sleeping." Daniel picked up his briefcase. He walked out of the study. She heard the front door open. She heard it close. She heard his car start in the driveway and the sound of it moving away down the long, oak-lined road. And then she heard nothing at all. Vanessa let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for several minutes. "Is he going to try to stop the board meeting?" she asked. "He's going to try everything," Emily said. She was already opening the laptop again. "He'll call every board member he has a relationship with. He'll try to reach Patricia before I can brief her. He'll have Richard file whatever motions he can put together by this afternoon. He will do all of those things." "And," Vanessa said. Emily looked at the screen in front of her, at the financial records and the legal documents and the audio files and the email chain that Vanessa had sent her at 7:45 this morning, all of it assembled into something that told the truth so completely there was no space left for a different story. "And," Emily said, "he will do all of those things after I've already done what I needed to do." She started typing. Patricia Huang arrived at 8:58, which meant she had left her house considerably earlier than 9 o'clock, which meant she had understood from the tone of Emily's call that this was not a routine briefing. Patricia was 61 years old and had spent 30 years in corporate governance, and she had the specific quality of certain women who have operated at high levels for a long time, an absolute economy of movement and expression, nothing wasted, nothing performed, every word chosen and every silence intentional. She sat down across from Emily. She looked at the documents Emily set in front of her. She read the first page. She turned to the second. She read without speaking for 4 minutes, and Emily sat across from her and let her read. When Patricia reached the fifth entity, she set the papers down. She looked at Emily. "How long have you had this?" she said. "I assembled it last night," Emily said, "between midnight and 6 this morning." Patricia looked at her steadily. "And before last night, did you know?" "I had questions," Emily said. "I told myself I was being suspicious." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "He's been operating inside this board for 2 years," she said, "and none of us caught it." "He's very good at operating inside trust," Emily said. "He's been doing it to me for 12 years. Patricia picked up the documents again. She looked at the email chain from Vanessa. She looked at the incorporation records, the payment histories, the filing that Daniel had tried to expedite that morning. "The board meeting," Patricia said. "Thursday," Emily said. "I can move it to tomorrow," Patricia said. Emily looked at her. "Can you hold the votes?" "I can hold 4 with certainty," Patricia said. 2 more are probable once they see this. That gives us 6. She paused. "We need 7 to remove a sitting CEO." "Who's the 7th?" Emily said. Patricia looked at the table for a moment. "Howard Chen," she said. Emily knew Howard. He was 68, conservative, and had been on the board for 9 years. He had been Daniel's strongest early advocate when Daniel first joined the company. He had vouched for him to the other directors. "Howard will not want to believe this," Patricia said. "No," Emily agreed. "He won't." "But Howard Chen," Patricia said, "has never voted against a documented fact in 30 years of board service. He has disagreed with interpretations. He has resisted conclusions. But he has never looked at a verified record and voted against it." She tapped the stack of documents on the table. "These are verified records," she said. Emily sat with that for a moment. "Thursday morning," she said. 8 o'clock, Patricia said. "I'll have the emergency session called by end of day today. Daniel will know about it." "He'll use the time to prepare his counter-narrative," Emily said. "Yes," Patricia said. "He will." Emily thought about Daniel in his car on the oak-lined road, making phone calls, recalibrating, building the story he would tell the board. She thought about how good he was at stories. She thought about the way he had told Vanessa she was cold, that she was difficult, that he had been trying to protect the company. She thought about giving him one night to build his story. She thought about what she would be able to do in that same night. Patricia stood to leave. At the door of the study, she paused. "Emily," she said, "your father—" She stopped herself, started again. "Robert brought me onto this board 15 years ago. He said, 'Patricia, I want people around this table who will tell me the truth even when it costs them something.' He said that was the only kind of board worth having." Emily said nothing. "I think he would recognize what you did last night," Patricia said. She left. Emily sat alone in her father's study, with the morning fully arrived, now light moving through the window. The house quiet around her, in the way it had been quiet all her childhood, the particular silence of a house that has stood through many things and intends to keep standing. Her phone buzzed. Sarah Brennan. The message said, "Final number confirmed. 5 entities. Total 5,312,000. Emily, there's one more thing. One of the shell companies made 3 payments to an account registered in Daniel's mother's name." Emily stared at that last line for a long time. Daniel's mother. A woman Emily had sent birthday cards to for 12 years. A woman she had cooked dinner for as sat across from at holiday tables, treated with the careful respect of a daughter-in-law who understood that family was something you tended. She set the phone down. She sat very still. And then, because she was Emily Caldwell, and she had learned from a man who never let the weight of a betrayal slow down the work that needed doing, she picked the phone back up. She typed, "Include it, all of it." She sent the message. She stood, stretched her back, and went to make the coffee she had forgotten about 2 hours ago. The house was hers. The documents were ready. Patricia Huang was already making calls, and Daniel Whitmore, somewhere in the city, was about to discover that the night he had given his wife to fall apart had been the night she finished building everything she needed to take his world apart instead. By 10 o'clock Wednesday morning, Daniel Whitmore had made 23 phone calls. Emily knew this because the estate's communication monitoring system, the same system her father had installed in 2001, the same one Daniel had lived beside for 10 years without ever asking about, logged every call made from devices connected to the villa's network. Daniel still had his work phone synced to the house Wi-Fi. He had never thought to disconnect it because he had never imagined he would need to. She sat at the kitchen table with her second cup of coffee and read through the call log, the way she read quarterly reports methodically without rushing, letting the pattern reveal itself. 14 calls to board members, 3 to Richard Cahill, 2 to the company's PR director, a man named Greg Fallon, who Emily had always found too eager to please. 1 to a journalist at the Financial Chronicle, whose name Emily recognized as someone who had written 3 flattering profiles of Daniel in the past 4 years. 1 to a number she did not recognize, which she flagged for Martin Cole. And 2 calls back-to-back to a number she recognized immediately. His mother. She set the coffee cup down. She thought about those 2 calls. She thought about a woman named Barbara Whitmore, 71 years old, who lived in a condominium in Scottsdale and who had received 3 payments totaling $140,000 into an account registered in her name. She thought about whether Barbara knew, whether Barbara had asked questions, whether Barbara had been told the same careful story that had been told to Vanessa, to the board, to Emily herself across 12 years of marriage. She did not know the answer. She was not sure it changed anything either way. Her phone rang. Martin Cole. "He filed for an emergency injunction this morning," Martin said. He did not bother with a greeting because they were past greetings now, past the courtesies that belonged to normal time. Richard Cahill filed at 9:45. He's arguing that the villa's security system reassignment constitutes unlawful interference with spousal property rights, and he's asking the court to restore Daniel's access pending the divorce proceedings. Emily absorbed this. How long does the injunction take? If he gets a sympathetic judge, 72 hours. But Emily... Martin paused in the way he paused when he wanted her to pay full attention. Richard made a mistake in the filing. What kind of mistake? He cited the property as jointly owned, but the Caldwell estate is not jointly owned. It was never jointly owned. It is held exclusively by the family trust, and Daniel Whitmore was never added as a trust beneficiary or co-trustee. His name is not on a single trust document. Richard either didn't know that or assumed it had been corrected at some point in the marriage. Emily thought about this. Daniel never asked to be added to the trust. No, Martin said. He didn't. Which is interesting, isn't it? A man who spent 12 years planning to take your company never moved to secure his position in the property structure, which tells you something about how he thought about this marriage. Emily understood immediately. He thought the transfer agreement was enough. He thought once he had the company shares, everything else was negotiable. He thought you would settle quietly, Martin said. He thought you were the kind of woman who would take a generous financial offer and step back rather than fight publicly. He was building a financial empire with your assets, but he miscalculated the one variable he had direct access to every day. Me, Emily said. You, Martin said. She picked up her coffee again. What happens to Richard's injunction? I filed a response 40 minutes ago, Martin said. I included the trust documentation, the property records. And Emily, I want you to know I took some satisfaction in this, a certified copy of the original deed, which has your father's name on it and no one else's. The judge will see it by end of day. The injunction will not survive the morning. Good, she said. There's something else, Martin said. His voice shifted slightly. Not heavier exactly, but more careful, the voice he used when the news was complicated rather than simply bad. Daniel's attorney reached out to my office this morning with a settlement offer. Emily put the coffee cup down again. Before the board meeting, she said. Before the board meeting, Martin confirmed. He's offering to walk away from the transfer agreement entirely. He's offering to resign as CEO voluntarily. He's asking for a financial settlement, which I won't repeat in detail because the number is still insulting, and he's asking for a mutual non-disclosure agreement that would prevent either party from discussing the circumstances of the divorce. The kitchen was very quiet. He wants a gag order, Emily said. Effectively, yes. On both of us. Yes. Emily thought about what that meant. She thought about $5 million, 5 shell companies. She thought about 3,000 employees and a board that had trusted the wrong man for 2 years. She thought about the mutual non-disclosure agreement and what it would protect and who it would protect it from. It was not about protecting Emily. A gauge order that silenced both of them silenced the story, and a story that stayed silent meant no accountability, no board investigation, no public record. Daniel Whitmore could resign quietly, take his settlement, and move to the next company with the next set of investors and the next board who didn't know what Emily knew. Tell Richard Cahill, Emily said, that the answer is no. A pause. Emily, the settlement offer does include Martin. She said his name the way her father had said it. She realized later with that particular combination of warmth and finality. Tell him no. All right, Martin said. She could hear something in his voice that might have been relief. I'll tell him no. She ended the call and sat with the silence for a moment. Outside, the oak trees were doing what they always did, indifferent and permanent, the same trees that had stood while her father built this house, and while she grew up in it, and while she brought a man she loved into it, and while that man spent 12 years mistaking her home for his own. At 11:30, Vanessa called. He came to my apartment, Vanessa said. Her voice was tight-controlled, the voice of someone managing fear with considerable effort. An hour ago. He knocked for 10 minutes. I didn't answer. Emily straightened. Did he try to get in? No, he just knocked and talked through the door. A pause. He said he knew I was inside. He said we needed to talk before I made a decision I couldn't take back. He said... Vanessa stopped. What did he say? Emily said. He said he could protect me if I came back to him. He said if I cooperated with you, I would be the one who ended up liable for the shell companies, not him, because my name was on the incorporation documents, and his wasn't. He said he had made sure of that. Another pause, shorter and sharper. He was very calm about it. That was the worst part. He was completely calm. Emily felt a cold clarity settle over her, the kind that comes when a thing you suspected becomes a thing you know. He structured it so your name was on record and his wasn't, she said. Yes, Vanessa said quietly. That's what he said. Vanessa, listen to me. He is telling you the truth about the incorporation documents. Your name is on them. But what he is not telling you is that the emails you gave me this morning, where he gives you explicit instructions to set up each entity, where he tells you specifically which accounts to use and which payments to route those emails, establish that you are acting under his direction. That is the legal distinction between a co-conspirator and an instrument. An instrument, Vanessa repeated, and the word landed in a complicated way. I know how that sounds, Emily said. But right now, that distinction is the difference between your future and his. Did you give him any indication that you were cooperating with me? No, I didn't say anything through the door. Good. Don't contact him. Don't respond to any messages from him or from Richard Cahill. If he comes back to your building, call the police and then call me. Do you understand? Yes, Vanessa said. Send me your full email archive with him, Emily said. Not just the incorporation emails, everything. I need to know if there are communications I haven't seen. The line was quiet for a moment. Emily, Vanessa said. Yes, I'm sorry. The words came out stripped of performance, just two plain words with nothing underneath them except the weight of meaning them. I know that doesn't. Send me the archive, Emily said, not unkindly, but firmly, because they were past the place where apology was the most important thing. We can talk about the rest later. She ended the call. She picked up her phone again and called her head of corporate security, a former federal investigator named James Rourke, who had worked for the Caldwell estate for 6 years and who approached every situation with the same methodical thoroughness that Emily had always found reassuring. James, she said when he answered, I need a surveillance log on the residential address I'm texting you right now starting from this morning. And I need you to know that Daniel Whitmore may attempt to access the villa today. The injunction his attorney filed will be dismissed, but he may not wait for the dismissal. Understood, James said. Do you want me on site? Yes, Emily said. And James, if he comes to the gate, you do not let him in, for any reason, including if he tells you I gave permission. I will communicate with you directly. No one else speaks for me on this. Copy that, James said. She put the phone in her pocket and went back to her laptop. She had a board presentation to finish. She had 6 hours. She got to work. At 2 p.m, her phone lit up with a name she had not expected. Howard Chen. She stared at his name on the screen for 3 full seconds before she answered. Howard, she said. Emily. Howard Chen's voice was the voice she knew from 9 years of board meetings, deliberate, measured, carrying the particular gravity of a man who had spent a lifetime choosing his words carefully. I've been sitting with Patricia's notification of the emergency session for the last 3 hours. I know this is difficult, Emily said. Difficult, Howard said slowly as if testing the word. I brought Daniel Whitmore to this board, Emily. I told your father's legacy directors that he was the right man to lead the company into the next decade. I staked my professional reputation on that recommendation. Emily said nothing. She let him speak. He called me this morning, Howard said. Before Patricia's notification came through, he told me you had discovered an affair and that you were using your position in the family trust to retaliate against him professionally. He said the financial records were being misrepresented by people who had a personal stake in removing him. He was a pause very convincing. He usually is, Emily said. Yes, Howard said. And something in that single syllable told Emily that Howard Chen had been sitting with Daniel's words for 3 hours and finding with the particular discomfort of an honest man that they did not quite hold together the way they should have. I'd like to see the records before the session, Howard said. Not Patricia's summary, the primary documents. I'll have Martin send them to you within the hour, Emily said. A pause. Emily. His voice had shifted, quieter now. If what I'm reading in Patricia's summary is accurate, the full picture of what's in those documents, I want you to know something. What? She said. I voted against your father once, Howard said. In 1998, there was a restructuring proposal he had brought to the board, and I thought it was too aggressive, and I voted against it in front of everyone. He called me into his office afterward. I thought I was going to hear something unpleasant. A pause. He thanked me. He said the board needed people who voted their conscience even when it was uncomfortable. He said that was the only kind of board worth having. Emily felt something move in her chest. Patricia told me about that conversation, she said quietly. He said it to her too. That sounds like Robert, Howard said. There was something in his voice, a warmth and old grief that had nothing to do with the board meeting or the documents or Daniel Whitmore. I'll read everything Martin sends. I'll see you tomorrow morning." He hung up. Emily sat still for a moment. 7 votes. She had needed 7 votes, and she had just heard the 7th one move. She went back to the presentation. By 5 in the afternoon, she had 42 slides. She cut it to 31. She cut it again to 24 because her father had taught her that the strongest case was always the simplest one, the one that trusted the facts to speak rather than the presenter. She cut the emotional language. She cut the personal history. She left in the documents and the numbers and the timeline clear and linear and undeniable. Then her laptop pinged with Vanessa's full email archive. She opened it. There were 462 emails between Vanessa Reed and Daniel Whitmore spanning 14 months. She did not read all of them. She did not need to. She searched for keywords. The shell company names the specific account numbers, the terms Daniel had used in the recording she had made the night before, and she found what she was looking for in the first 20 minutes. And then she found something she had not been looking for. She found an email dated 8 months ago, sent from Daniel's personal account to Vanessa at 11:30 at night, 3 days after Emily had come home from a board conference in Chicago and told Daniel over dinner that she was concerned about some vendor payments she had flagged in the quarterly review. The email said, "She noticed the Q3 vendor line. How much does she actually know? Find out what she said to the audit team." Emily read it 3 times. He had used Vanessa to monitor her. For months, the woman who was having an affair with her husband had been positioned inside the company specifically to track what Emily was paying attention to report back on her conversations, to alert Daniel if she was getting close to something he needed to protect. She thought about the lunches she had occasionally had with junior executives that Vanessa would have arranged. She thought about the conversations she had in the hallway and conference rooms, in the spaces where you say things to colleagues without thinking because you believe you're among people who are simply doing their jobs. She thought about how long she had been watched by someone she hadn't known to watch back. The anger came then. Not the cold, precise thing from the night before, but something hotter and more human, the anger of a woman who realizes that the violations went deeper than she had understood. It moved through her quickly, and she let it because she had learned from her father that feeling a thing completely was the fastest way through it. Then it passed. She forwarded the email to Martin with a single note. "Add this to the presentation." Final slide. At 6:30, her phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline read, "Sources say Whitmore Global CEO faces internal investigation board emergency session called." She read the article. It was thin on specifics. Whoever Daniel had called at the Financial Chronicle had moved fast, but not fast enough to get real information. The article described a dispute between major shareholders and alleged financial irregularities that company sources say are being investigated internally. It quoted an anonymous source saying the situation had been blown out of proportion by personal issues between the CEO and a family stakeholder. That was her. Emily Caldwell, who had spent 12 years being described in relation to her husband, was now a family stakeholder. She almost smiled. She forwarded the article to Martin with a note that said, "Expect more of this tonight. Don't respond." Martin's reply came back in 2 minutes. Already not responding. "Emily, get some sleep. You need to be sharp tomorrow." She closed the laptop. She stood. She walked to the kitchen and stood at the counter for a moment, and she thought about food, and she realized she had eaten nothing today except half a cup of coffee and a piece of toast at 7 in the morning before Patricia arrived. She opened the refrigerator and stood there looking at it the way you look at something without quite seeing it, and she thought about the lemon chicken pasta she had been planning to make the night before the bottle of wine she had imagined opening the surprise she had spent an 11-hour flight looking forward to. She closed the refrigerator. She ordered soup from a restaurant 2 miles away that delivered, and she sat at the kitchen table while she waited and let herself feel for the first time since she had walked through the bedroom door the full weight of what she was carrying. Not the company, not the fraud, not the board meeting, the marriage. 12 years. She had given 12 years to a man she had trusted with the most private parts of herself, her history, her fears, the particular loneliness of being Robert Caldwell's daughter, in a world that only saw the name, the specific grief of losing her father and feeling unmoored in the company he had left her. She had told Daniel things she had never told anyone, things she had brought to him in the dark of the early morning, when the weight of being strong got too heavy, and he had been learning her weaknesses. That was the part that lived in a different place than anger. That was the part that lived somewhere behind her sternum, in the place where you keep the things you trusted someone with, and the knowledge of that could have flattened her. On a different night, in a different version of her life, it might have. But she was her father's daughter, and her father had taught her that the appropriate response to a betrayal of that depth was not to collapse under the weight of it. The appropriate response was to make sure it never happened to anyone else. The soup arrived. She ate it at the kitchen table in the quiet house. She thought about 3,000 employees and what they would wake up to tomorrow morning. She thought about the ones who had been told there was no budget for things that mattered. She thought about what it meant to protect something that was worth protecting. She washed the bowl. She went back to the study. At 8:45, James Rourke called. "He's at the gate," James said. Emily went still. "Daniel," she said. "Yes, in his car. He's been sitting outside the gate for about 20 minutes. He hasn't called the intercom. He's just sitting there." She thought about Daniel outside the gate of the house he had lived in for 10 years, in the dark, sitting in his car. She thought about what that looked like from inside the car, the house lit up beyond the iron gate, the oak trees, the long driveway, the home he had occupied and never owned. "Leave him there," she said. "You don't want me to. Leave him there, James. He can sit outside the gate as long as he wants to. Don't engage with him. Just make sure he doesn't attempt to access the property." "Understood," James said. She put the phone down. She picked it up again 30 seconds later. She called Martin. "Daniel is outside the villa," she said, "sitting in his car at the gate." Martin was quiet for a moment. "He's scared," he said. "I know," Emily said. "The injunction was dismissed at 4:15, Martin said. "I was going to call you, but I knew you were working. Emily, he has no legal standing on that property. None. And he knows it." "Yes," she said. "He came there because it's the only place he has left to go," Martin said. "He's run through his options and this is what's left, sitting outside a gate that doesn't recognize him anymore." Emily thought about that for a moment. She thought about this night before, and the keypad buttons that didn't work, and the morning when she had told him the gate code had been updated, and the look on his face when she said Patricia Huang was arriving at 9. She thought about the sequence of doors that had closed one by one as the night moved into day, and the day moved into this evening. "How is he going to play tomorrow?" she said. "He'll come in with the counter-narrative," Martin said. "He'll present himself as a man who made personal mistakes, but who has been an outstanding steward of the company. He'll acknowledge the relationship with Vanessa and call it a private matter. He'll challenge the financial records on technical grounds, argue that the shell companies were part of a legitimate strategy that wasn't properly disclosed because of internal communication failures. He'll try to make it about process rather than intent." "Will it work?" Emily said. "Not against what you have," Martin said. "But he'll make the room uncomfortable before you shut it down. He's good at making rooms uncomfortable in his favor. You know that." "Yes," Emily said. "I know that." "Emily," Martin paused. "I've been a lawyer for 38 years. I have sat across from a lot of people in a lot of difficult moments. I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it from me as someone who knew your father and knows you." She waited. "What you did in the last 24 hours, Martin said. "The clarity, the documentation, the structure you built in one night, Robert did it the same way. When someone came at something he had built, he did not get emotional and he did not get reckless. He got precise. I was the most precise man I ever watched work when the stakes were highest." A pause. "You are that, Emily. Exactly that." She sat in the study her father had built and felt the truth of that settle into her like something she had always known but had needed to hear from someone who had known him. "Get some sleep," Martin said. "I'll see you at 7:30. She ended the call. She went to check on James one more time. "Is he still there?" "Just left," James said. "About 5 minutes ago. Drove slowly. Didn't try anything." "Okay," she said. "Thank you, James." She set the phone down. She thought about Daniel driving away from the gate of a house that used to be his home, and she felt the weight of that in a complicated way that was not satisfaction and not sadness, but something in between, the feeling of watching something end that should have ended differently. She went upstairs. She changed out of the clothes she had been wearing for 36 hours. She washed her face. She sat on the edge of the bed in the room where she had found Daniel and Vanessa, the night before the room she had returned to because she was not going to be removed from her own life, not 1 inch of it, and she sat there for a moment in the quiet. She thought about her father. She thought about him saying, "I built you a house that will always know who it belongs to." She had understood it as sentiment. She understood it now as a blueprint. She lay down. She set her alarm for 6:15, and she thought as sleep finally reached her after 36 hours of wakefulness about tomorrow morning. About 24 slides and verified records and the faces of 7 board members who would sit in a room and hear the truth told clearly. About Howard Chen, who had spent 9 years believing in the wrong man and who would spend tomorrow morning reading primary documents with the honest, uncomfortable attention of a person who had never voted against a verified fact in 30 years of board service. About the moment the vote would be called. About what came after. She did not feel afraid. That was the thing she noticed last before sleep, took her completely the absence of fear. There had been a time not long ago measured in hours rather than years when she had stood at a bedroom door and felt the ground shift beneath her. And she had stood in that shifting and not fallen. And she had worked through a night and a day and into another night, and she had built something true out of something broken. Tomorrow morning, Daniel Whitmore would walk into that boardroom believing he could still control what happened in it. He had been wrong about her once. I was about to find out how final that mistake was going to be. Emily was dressed and at the kitchen table by 6:50 Thursday morning, 40 minutes before Martin Cole was due to arrive with her laptop open and her presentation loaded, and a cup of coffee she had made with the automatic precision of someone whose hands knew what to do, even when their mind was somewhere else entirely. She had slept 4 hours. It was enough. She had learned from her father that the quality of sleep before something important was not about duration, but about the state of mind you carried into it, and she had gone to sleep the night before without fear, and she had woken up without it, and that was enough. Her phone showed 14 messages received overnight. 3 from Martin, 2 from Patricia Huang, 1 from Sarah Brennan with a final audit summary attached, 1 from Howard Chen that said only documents received, see you at 8. 1 from James Rourke, confirming the property had been quiet all night. 1 from her assistant in New York asking about the rescheduled meeting. And 5 from a number she did not recognize, all sent between midnight and 2 in the morning, all variations of the same message. She read the first one. It said, "Emily, this is Daniel's mother. I need to speak with you before this goes any further. Please call me. I know about the account. I want you to understand what happened." She sat with that for a moment. Barbara Whitmore had called 5 times in the middle of the night. She thought about what that meant. She thought about a 71-year-old woman sitting in a condominium in Scottsdale, awake at midnight, awake at 1, awake at 2, picking up the phone and calling the daughter-in-law she had exchanged birthday cards with for 12 years. She thought about what it cost a person to make that call. She thought about whether Barbara knew, and if she knew, how much she knew, and whether any version of what she knew made the account in her name acceptable. She put the phone face down on the table. She would deal with Barbara after the board meeting. Right now, Barbara was a complication she could not afford to carry into that room. Martin arrived at 7:28, 2 minutes early, which was his way of saying without saying it that he understood the weight of the morning. He was 67 years old and had the bearing of a man who had spent 4 decades walking into difficult rooms and walking out of them with the result he came for. He set his briefcase on the kitchen table, accepted the coffee Emily handed him, and looked at her with the assessing calm of a doctor checking a patient before surgery. "How are you?" he said. "Ready," she said. He nodded. That was the correct answer, and they both knew it. They went through the presentation together for 40 minutes. Martin asked 7 questions. Emily answered 6 of them before he finished asking. On the 7th, about the Wyoming entity and the sequence of payments relative to the board approval dates, she pulled up the supporting documentation and walked him through it in 3 minutes flat. Martin sat back. "Daniel is going to come in with a narrative about unauthorized access to company servers," he said. "He called Richard Cahill at 11 last night. Richard's drafting a motion claiming that the financial records you pulled are tainted because you accessed them outside your formal executive authority." Emily had anticipated this. "My father retained administrative access to the company server architecture as a trust provision when he created the CEO position. That access was never removed. It transferred to me as trust beneficiary. My access is not only authorized, it predates Daniel's employment with the company." Martin smiled slightly. "I know. I drafted that provision. I'm telling you because Daniel doesn't know I drafted it, and Richard Cahill's motion is going to collapse the moment we produce the original trust documentation. I want you to enjoy that moment when it happens." "I'll try," Emily said. At 7:55, they left for the Whitmore Global Holdings headquarters downtown in Martin's car because Emily had decided she would not drive herself. She had decided this the night before quietly and without drama because she understood that arriving at a board meeting as the person who was about to remove the CEO required a specific kind of composure, and that composure was easier to maintain if you were not also navigating traffic. She sat in the passenger seat and watched the city move past the window and thought about nothing in particular, which was itself a skill she had learned from her father, the ability to clear the internal workspace before a high-stakes moment to arrive empty enough to respond to what actually happened rather than what you had imagined would happen. Her phone buzzed. Patricia Huang. "He's already here," Patricia said without preamble. "Daniel arrived at 7:30. He's in the conference room with two people I don't recognize. Not Richard Cahill, different attorneys." Emily processed this. "He hired new counsel overnight." "It appears so. Emily, he also brought Greg Fallon." Greg Fallon, the PR director, the man Daniel had called twice the morning before. "He's planning to manage the narrative in real time," Emily said. "If he can't stop the vote, he wants to control the story that comes out of it." "That's what I think," Patricia said. "I want you to know that 4 directors are already in the building. Howard arrived at 7:45. He hasn't spoken to Daniel." "Good," Emily said. "Patricia, thank you for everything you've done in the last 24 hours. A pause on Patricia's end, brief and warm. "Robert asked me to serve on this board because he wanted people who would tell the truth when it was hard. I'm just doing what I was asked to do." Another pause. "Get here." Emily ended the call and looked at Martin. "New attorneys," she said. "He spent the night regrouping," Martin said. "It doesn't change anything. He can have 10 attorneys in that room. The documents are the documents." She nodded. They arrived at 8:02. The headquarters building was 42 stories of glass and steel that Daniel had moved the company into 3 years ago, a relocation Emily had supported because the new space was genuinely better for the employees, even if the timing had seemed aggressive. She had always tried to be fair about the things Daniel did well. He had done some things well. That was the most painful part, in a way, the mixture. The genuine capability threaded through the betrayal, making it impossible to say simply that she had loved a fraud. She had loved a real person who had chosen fraud when the stakes got high enough. She walked through the lobby without looking at the art Daniel had personally selected for the walls. She took the elevator to the 38th floor. She walked to the boardroom with Martin beside her and her folder under her arm, and she did not hurry, and she did not slow down, and she felt with each step the precise clarity that comes when you have done everything you could do and the moment has finally arrived. She opened the boardroom door. The room held 12 people, 7 board directors, including Patricia and Howard. 2 of Daniel's new attorneys, both young and sharp-looking in the way of people who had been pulled from their beds at midnight and told to prepare for battle by morning. Greg Fallon standing near the window with his phone in his hand, and the expression of a man who was not sure which side of history he was going to end up on. And Daniel. Daniel was standing at the head of the table. Howe was in his best suit. The dark charcoal one, the one he wore to the most important meetings, the one Emily had told him 3 years ago, made him look like the version of himself he was trying to be. He had slept badly. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the slight puffiness around his eyes that no amount of preparation could fully disguise. But he had arrived prepared. He had arrived fighting. He looked at Emily when she walked in. Their eyes met across the length of the boardroom table. He did not look away. Neither did she. Patricia called the meeting to order at 8:07. "This is an emergency session of the Whitmore Global Holdings Board of Directors," Patricia said. "Called under Section 12 of the Corporate Charter to address a matter of urgent financial governance. Both parties have been formally notified. Both parties are present. We will proceed." Daniel's lead attorney, a man in his 40s, with the confident bearing of someone who billed at rates that discouraged argument, raised his hand. "Before we proceed, I'd like to formally object to the framing of this session. My client has not been given adequate time to—" "Section 12 of the Charter," Patricia said without looking at him. Allows for emergency sessions with a minimum of 18 hours notice. My client, this board, received notice at 2:15 yesterday afternoon. It is now 8:07 Thursday morning. That is 17 hours and 52 minutes. She looked up. I'll grant you 8 minutes. The attorney sat down. Daniel said nothing. He was watching Emily the way he had watched her across hundreds of meetings and dinners and negotiations, with the focused attention of a man who was reading the room through the person he knew best in it. Emily sat down. She opened her folder. Patricia gave the floor to Emily. Emily stood. She did not look at her presentation slides. She had spent 36 hours building those slides, and she knew every word on every one of them, the way she knew her own name, and she had decided at 6 this morning that she would not look at them, because looking at slides was what you did when you needed help telling the story, and she did not need help. She looked at the board. 18 months ago, she said, $522,000 was transferred from Whitmore Global Holdings operating accounts to a consulting entity registered in Delaware called Apex Strategic Partners, LLC. There were no consulting deliverables. There was no contract on file. There was no board approval. There was no disclosure. She paused for exactly one beat. That was the first transfer. There were 37 more. She let that number land. 37. She watched it move across the faces around the table, watched Howard Chen's expression go very still, watched the two directors she had been less certain about, Marcus Webb's predecessor on the operations side, a man named Gerald Holt, and a director named Susan Park, who had always been cordial with Daniel, absorb the number with the involuntary intake of breath that honest people produce when they are confronted with a fact that is larger than they expected. She walked them through it. 20 minutes. She gave them the 5 entities, the 37 transfers, the total figure, $5,312,000. The timeline overlaid against the board meeting calendar, showing 3 of the largest transfers occurring in the weeks immediately following board votes that Daniel had championed. She showed them the Wyoming entity and the account registered in Barbara Whitmore's name. She showed them the incorporation documents with Vanessa Reed listed as registered agent and the email chain in which Daniel gave Vanessa explicit instructions for each filing. She showed them the transfer agreement, 1 page, her name, $1. She showed them the recording. That was the moment the room changed. Daniel's voice came through the laptop speaker recorded on Tuesday night, clear and unmistakable, his words to Richard Cahill, about moving the filing up, about Emily coming home early, about needing it done before she got an attorney involved. His voice in the room he thought he was alone in, saying the things he would have never said if he had known she was listening 2 floors below. Gerald Holt put his pen down on the table. Susan Park took her glasses off. Howard Chen looked at the table in front of him for a long moment, with the expression of a man who is experiencing something that has no comfortable name. Daniel's attorney was on his feet. I have to object to the use of this recording. The legality of recording private communications without California law permits the recording of communications in which the recording party is a participant, Martin Cole said from his seat beside Emily. Ms. Caldwell recorded a conversation in her own home. She was present in the building. The communication was not private under California statute. The recording was made in a residential property that my client has legal standing in as the injunction your firm filed claiming that standing was dismissed at 4:15 yesterday afternoon, Martin said. He slid a document across the table toward the attorney. Dismissed with prejudice. The property is held exclusively by the Caldwell Family Trust. Mr. Whitmore has no legal standing on that property. The recording is admissible. The attorney looked at the document. He sat down. Daniel had not moved. He was still standing at the head of the table, and he was looking at Emily, and she could see him doing what he had always done in difficult moments, the rapid internal recalculation, the shifting of pieces, the search for the angle that still worked. She watched him find it. "May I speak?" Daniel said. Patricia looked at Emily. Emily nodded once. "Thank you," Daniel said. He straightened. He adjusted his jacket. He took the breath of a man who has been in front of audiences his entire professional life and who knows how to use a breath as punctuation. "I want to address this board directly, as I have always addressed this board honestly and without intermediary." He was good. She watched him be good, and she felt no anger, only the clear-eyed recognition of a skill being deployed. "The financial structures that have been presented this morning are real," he said. "I won't insult this board by denying that they exist. What I will tell you is that they were part of a legitimate defensive strategy designed to protect the company's core assets from a potential hostile acquisition attempt that I became aware of 14 months ago. The strategy was improperly documented. I take full responsibility for that failure of disclosure, but the intent was always to protect this company." He paused. "The hostile acquisition target," Susan Park said carefully, "would be documented somewhere, in your communications, in your security monitoring, in the materials you reviewed when you became aware of it. Can you produce that documentation?" Daniel did not hesitate. "My legal team is preparing a full disclosure package that will address—" "That's not documentation," Howard Chen said. The room went quiet. Howard had not spoken until this moment. He had sat with his hands folded on the table and his eyes on the documents Emily had distributed, and he had not said a single word, and the weight of his silence had been considerable, because everyone in that room knew what Howard Chen's advocacy for Daniel Whitmore had meant to the company's history. Now Howard spoke, and his voice was the voice Emily had heard on the phone the day before. Deliberate, unhurried, the voice of a man who had been sitting with a truth long enough to make peace with it. "I brought you to this board," Howard said to Daniel. "I told Robert Caldwell's legacy directors that you were a man of integrity. I said that in this room, and I said it publicly, and I meant it when I said it." He paused. "I need to ask you a direct question, and I need you to answer me directly, because I am going to make a decision this morning that I cannot unmake, and I am going to make it based on what you tell me." Daniel looked at Howard. Something shifted in his eyes. Not calculation this time. Something older and more complicated, the expression of a man confronting someone he had genuinely respected. "Ask me," Daniel said. "Was there a hostile acquisition threat?" Howard said. "A real one, documented, with a specific acquirer and a specific timeline, yes or no?" The room held its breath. Daniel was quiet for 4 seconds. Emily counted them. The threat was assessed as a risk probability rather than a confirmed yes or no, Howard said. Another silence, shorter. "No," Daniel said. 2 words would have been enough. He had used one. The single syllable settled into the room like a stone into still water, and Emily watched the ripples move across every face at the table, and she knew that the vote was over before it was called. She knew it in the way she had known standing in her bedroom doorway 2 nights ago that her marriage was over before she had said a single word. Some things end before anyone makes them official. The official part is just the paperwork. Patricia Huang let the silence hold for exactly 5 seconds. Then she said, "I'd like to call the vote." Daniel's attorney was on his feet again. "This board does not have the authority to remove a sitting CEO without a formal Section 9 of the Corporate Charter," Patricia said, "allows for immediate removal of a sitting CEO by 2/3 majority vote in cases of confirmed financial misconduct. The documentation presented this morning constitutes confirmed financial misconduct under the Charter's definition. We are proceeding." She looked around the table. "All those in favor of the immediate removal of Daniel Whitmore as Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Global Holdings, please indicate." Patricia raised her hand. Howard Chen raised his. Gerald Holt raised his. Susan Park raised hers, and she did it without hesitating, which Emily noted. The 5th director raised his hand. The 6th. 7 hands. All 7. Daniel was very still. The attorney was speaking, saying something about formal appeals processes and shareholder rights and legal recourse, but his voice had the quality of a speech being given after the audience had already left the room. Daniel was not listening to him. Daniel was looking at Emily, and Emily looked back. She waited until the attorney finished, then she stood. "I want to address the board," she said. Patricia nodded. "I want to be clear about something," Emily said, looking around the table rather than at Daniel. "What happened in this room this morning is not revenge. I want every person at this table to understand that, because the story that gets told about this is going to matter for 3,000 people whose livelihoods depend on this company's reputation." She paused. "Daniel Whitmore diverted $5,300,000 from this company. That money belongs to the company. That means it belongs to its shareholders, its employees, and its mission. This board has an obligation to pursue its recovery, to engage law enforcement regarding the financial misconduct, and to commission a full independent audit of the last 3 years of company finances." She looked at Patricia. "I'll be recommending an interim CEO from within the current executive team while a proper search is conducted," she said. I'd suggest Marcus Webb. He's been doing the operational work that should have been recognized years ago." Patricia wrote something down. Emily picked up her folder. She looked finally at Daniel. "I was standing at the head of the table where he had stood for 4 years as CEO of the company her father had built, and he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, not in 12 years of marriage, not in any of the difficult moments they had navigated together, not in the night before last, when he had tried every approach he knew to manage her. He looked like a man who was finally, for the first time, seeing something clearly. She did not feel satisfaction. She had expected to feel something like satisfaction, and she did not. She felt the particular exhaustion of a task completed, and underneath it, far underneath it, the quiet grief of something that had been real once and was now entirely and permanently gone. "Your access to company systems has been terminated effective this morning," she said. "Your office will be secured by close of business today. Martin Cole will be in contact with Richard Cahill regarding the terms of your separation agreement." She paused. "For what it's worth, Daniel, and I mean this because I am not someone who says things she doesn't mean, you are genuinely talented. You could have built something real with what you were given. You chose not to." She turned to leave. "Emily." His voice stopped her. Just her name, said differently than he had ever said it in that room, with none of the performance and none of the management and none of the 12 years of practiced familiarity. Just her name said plainly by a man who had run out of everything else. She turned back. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He tried again. "I underestimated you," he said. It was the most honest thing he had said since she walked into the bedroom 2 nights ago. She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. She walked out. Martin was beside her in the hallway, matching her pace without a word, and she was grateful for his silence because she needed it, needed the 30 seconds of the hallway to let the room she had just left finish being what it was before she stepped into what came next. The elevator doors opened. As they stepped in, her phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. The message said, "I just saw the news alert. Is it done?" Emily typed back, "It's done." Vanessa's response came immediately. "Thank you. I know that doesn't cover it, but thank you." Emily put the phone in her pocket. The elevator descended. In the lobby, 2 journalists were already waiting, which meant Greg Fallon had done his job before he understood which direction the morning was going to go, and the story had gone out before the vote had been called. Emily walked past them without stopping, letting Martin's presence and her own forward momentum communicate everything that needed to be communicated without words. She got into the car. She sat back against the seat and let out one long, slow breath. "Marcus Webb," Martin said. "Yes," she said. "He'll be good." "I know. My father liked him." Martin glanced at her. "Your father liked you better." She almost smiled. Almost. "Martin," she said, "Barbara Whitmore called me 5 times last night." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet," she said. "She may have known about the account. She may not have. Either way, she's a 71-year-old woman, and her son just lost everything in a boardroom while she was sitting in Scottsdale waiting for the news. The account will be part of the recovery process," Martin said. "That's unavoidable." "I know," Emily said, "but how we approach her is a choice. I'd rather make it carefully." Martin nodded. "I'll call her attorney first, see if she's willing to cooperate with the audit. If she is, there's room for consideration." "Yes," Emily said. They drove for a while in silence, the city moving past them, ordinary and indifferent the way the world always is when it doesn't know something enormous has just shifted inside a building on a Thursday morning. Her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She answered. "Ms. Caldwell," a man's voice, official sounding. "This is Special Agent Kevin Dorado, FBI Financial Crimes Division. I'm calling because we received a referral this morning from the Santa Clara County DA's office regarding financial misconduct at Whitmore Global Holdings. I understand you may have documentation relevant to an investigation. Would you be available to meet this week?" Emily looked out the window. The FBI. The referral had moved faster than she expected, which meant Patricia had contacted the DA's office before the board meeting, which meant Patricia Huang had been operating on 3 tracks simultaneously and had said nothing about it, which was exactly the kind of thing Robert Caldwell would have called the right kind of board member. "I'm available tomorrow morning," Emily said. "I have everything you'll need." "Thank you, Ms. Caldwell," the agent said. "I'll have my assistant send you the meeting details." She ended the call. Martin had heard enough. He looked at her with raised eyebrows. "Patricia," Emily said, Of course, Martin said. She sat with the new information for a moment. FBI, federal investigation. What had been a corporate governance matter was about to become something with a different weight and a different timeline and consequences that would follow Daniel Whitmore into whatever life he tried to build after this one. She thought about whether she felt anything about that. She felt that it was right, not in the punitive sense, in the structural sense, in the sense that the world works better when the gap between what people do and what they are held accountable for is as small as possible, and that the work of keeping that gap small was not revenge, but maintenance. The maintenance of a world where trust was worth something. Her father had believed that. She believed it. "There's something I need to do before tomorrow," she said. "What?" Martin said. "Go home," she said. "Go back to the villa. Just be in it for a while." Martin looked at her. "Alone," he said. "Yes," she said. "For a couple of hours. Then I'll call you." He nodded. He understood without being told that what she needed was the thing that could not be scheduled or documented or presented in a boardroom. The simple human requirement of standing in your own space after something has ended and before the next thing begins, and letting yourself feel the full weight of both. He dropped her at the gate. She walked up the driveway alone between the oak trees her mother had planted, and she went inside. The house was quiet, and hers. She walked through the foyer, past the hallway table where she had set her bag 3 nights ago, past the photographs on the wall, past the study where she had spent the night building the truth, and she stopped in the kitchen where she had eaten soup alone, and let herself feel the grief she had been carrying since the moment she opened a bedroom door and heard her husband laughing. She stood there and felt it. She felt the 12 years and the trust and the specific loneliness of realizing that someone you loved had been watching you and cataloging your vulnerabilities while you were busy loving them. She felt the loss of the version of her life she had believed she was living. She felt the weight of being right when you would have given almost anything to have been wrong. She stood there and felt all of it completely the way her father had taught her to feel difficult things without looking away and without letting it last 1 second longer than it needed to. Then she washed her hands at the kitchen sink because that was what her mother had always done when something was finished, a simple physical act that said, "That is over and this is now, and the hands that did the work are clean." She dried them on the kitchen towel. She picked up her phone and called Marcus Webb. He answered on the second ring. "Marcus," she said, "I'm calling because I want to offer you something, and I want to offer it before you hear about it from anyone else." A pause on his end. "I heard about the board meeting," he said, 20 minutes ago. "Then you know the CEO position is vacant," she said. A longer pause. "Emily," Marcus said. His voice had the quality of a man who was trying to keep something out of it and not quite succeeding. I'm offering you the interim position today," she said, "with the intention of making it permanent pending a formal board review in 60 days. I think you're the right person. I think my father would have thought so too, and I'm sorry it took this long for the company to see it." The silence that followed was the silence of a man absorbing something he had worked toward for years and had stopped expecting. "Yes," Marcus Webb said. "Good," Emily said. "Come to the villa tomorrow at 9. We have a lot to talk about." She ended the call. She stood in the kitchen of the house her father built in the morning light with the work behind her and the work ahead and the clean, clear knowledge of who she was and what she had protected and what it had cost and what it was worth. She was not the woman who had come home early from New York 3 nights ago, hoping for a surprise that turned into a discovery that turned into a war. She was not even quite the woman she had been before the war began. She was something else now, something that had been in her all along, built into the foundation of her by a man who understood that the most important thing you could give your daughter was not protection from the world, but the architecture to protect herself within it. The house was quiet around her. Outside, the oak trees stood exactly where they had always stood, and Emily Caldwell stood in the middle of everything she had reclaimed, and she was not broken, and she was not bitter, and she was not finished. She was for the first time in longer than she could remember exactly where she was supposed to be. Marcus Webb arrived at the villa at 8:57 Friday morning, 2 minutes early, which told Emily something about the kind of man he was, the kind who understood that punctuality was a form of respect, and that this particular morning deserved it. She opened the door before he knocked, because she had heard his car on the driveway, and she looked at him standing on the threshold of the house, and thought about the last time she had seen him in person 6 months ago, in a hallway outside a budget meeting where he had come to her quietly and said his department had been told there was no money for the software upgrade his team needed. She had gone to Daniel with that request. Daniel had said the numbers weren't there. She thought about that while she poured Marcus a cup of coffee and set it on the kitchen table and sat down across from him, and she thought about what it meant that the money for Marcus's software upgrade had in fact been there. It had simply been in Delaware and Wyoming, and 3 other states moving through entities that didn't exist, into accounts that served no one but the man who created them. Marcus was 53 years old, with the steady, capable presence of someone who had spent 20 years doing important work without sufficient acknowledgement, and who had not let the insufficient acknowledgement make him smaller. He had joined the company in her father's time. Robert Caldwell had hired him personally, which was all Emily had ever needed to know about his fundamental character. "How are you holding up?" Marcus said. She appreciated that he asked. Most people in his position would have been too focused on the magnitude of what was being offered to think about the person offering it. "Better than I expected," she said. "Worse than I'm showing. You know how it is." "I do," he said. And the way he said it told her he actually did that. This was not a polite affirmation, but a genuine one, the response of a man who had carried difficult things without making them other people's burden. They talked for 2 hours. Emily laid out the immediate priorities: the FBI audit, the independent financial review, the communication strategy for the 3,000 employees who had woken up Thursday morning to news alerts about their company and deserved a clearer picture than the media was providing. She talked about the corporate structure changes she had been considering since the night she sat in her father's study and built the architecture of truth from scratch, the provisions and oversight mechanisms that should have existed already and hadn't the gaps that Daniel's tenure had exploited and that she intended to close permanently. Marcus listened, the way good leaders listen, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually absorbing, asking questions that moved the conversation forward, rather than redirecting it toward himself. At one point he said, "The software upgrade, for my department." "Approved," Emily said. "Budget it for next quarter. I want a full proposal on Marcus Webb's desk, which is to say, your desk, by end of month." He looked at her. "Your father would have done it 3 years ago," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry it took this long." He shook his head once, not dismissing the apology, receiving it. "Let's make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." That was the moment Emily knew she had chosen correctly. After Marcus left, she sat in the kitchen with her 3rd cup of coffee and opened her laptop to the news coverage, which had expanded considerably overnight, from the thin Financial Chronicle alert to full stories in the Wall Street Journal, the Times, Bloomberg, and 4 regional business publications. The coverage was accurate in its facts and dramatic in its framing, as business journalism always was when a CEO fell from a significant height. Daniel's name appeared in every headline. His photograph, the official headshot, the one where he looked exactly like the man he had presented himself as for 4 years, ran beside words like fraud and misconduct and removal, words that would follow his name in search results for the rest of his professional life. She read the coverage without feeling much about it, which surprised her. She had expected to feel something vindication or sadness, or the uncomfortable satisfaction of watching a public record correct itself. Instead, she felt mostly the quiet of a person who had been in the room when the thing actually happened, and for whom the newspaper version was simply a reduced reflection of a reality she already fully knew. Her phone rang. Special Agent Kevin Dorado. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, "I want to confirm our meeting tomorrow and also let you know that we executed a warrant this morning on Whitmore Global Holdings' server infrastructure. We'll be working from our own copies of the financial records going forward, so you won't need to maintain chain of custody on what you've been holding." "Understood," she said. "Agent Dorado, I also have audio recordings and an email archive from a cooperating witness, Vanessa Reed. She's prepared to speak with your team." A brief pause. "That's significant," he said. "Can you have her contact us directly?" "I'll have her call you today," Emily said. After she hung up, she sent Vanessa a message with Agent Dorado's number and a single line, "He's expecting your call. You're doing the right thing." Vanessa's response came back in under a minute. It said, "I know. I'm scared, but I know." Emily typed, being scared and doing it anyway is the only kind of courage that counts. She set the phone down and thought about that for a moment, about Vanessa Reed, 26 years old, who had made a series of choices that she could not fully take back, and who was now in the specific way of people who have arrived at clarity too late and decided to do something with it anyway, choosing to tell the truth. Emily did not forgive her exactly. Forgiveness was a different process, slower and more private, and she had not yet begun it. But she held the recognition that Vanessa's situation was complicated in ways that deserved acknowledgement, that the line between victim and participant was not always as clean as it looked from the outside, and that a 26-year-old woman who had been told a careful story by a man twice her age and in a position of authority over her deserved at least the space to find her way towards something better. The villa was quiet around her. She had been in it for 24 hours since coming home from the boardroom, and each hour she spent in it, she felt it settle back into itself a little more like a house, exhaling like a space that had been held in a particular tension for a long time, and was slowly releasing it now that the source of the tension was gone. Her phone buzzed with a message from Martin. It said Richard Cahill withdrew from Daniel's representation this morning. New counsel only. Martin's note. I count that as a good sign for our side. Also, Barbara Whitmore's attorney called. She wants to cooperate fully with the audit. She says she didn't know. Emily read that last line twice. She says she didn't know. She thought about Barbara. She thought about the 5 overnight calls, the 71-year-old woman sitting in Scottsdale, waiting for the news, the birthday cards they had exchanged for 12 years. She thought about what it meant to be the mother of a man who had done this to learn what your son was capable of through a news alert and a federal warrant, and the calls that started coming in before 7 in the morning. She typed back to Martin, I believe her. Make sure the audit is handled carefully. She's not the target. Martin's response already told them that. At 2 in the afternoon, something happened that Emily had not planned for. She was in the study, working through the structural governance proposals she intended to bring to the board's next regular session, when her phone rang with a number she recognized as her father's oldest friend, a man named Charles Bennett, who had known Robert Caldwell for 40 years and who had retired from the company's original advisory board 8 years ago and whom Emily had not spoken to in at least 2. Charles, she said. Emily. His voice was 80 years old and absolutely steady. I've been following the news. I wanted to call. I appreciate that, she said. Your father called me the night before he passed, Charles said. Did you know that? She had not known that. She had known her father made calls in his last days, had known he was tying things together in the careful way of a man who understood the shape of what was coming and wanted to leave the important things said. But she had not known about Charles. He talked about you for 40 minutes, Charles said. He told me about the trust provisions. He told me about the security system, the access architecture, the protections he'd spent 2 years putting into place. He told me he was worried about leaving you with, he used a specific phrase. He said he was worried about leaving you with the company because the company came with its current leadership, and he wasn't sure the current leadership deserved what the company came with. Emily was very still. He meant Daniel, she said. He meant Daniel, Charles confirmed. He told me he had tried to like him and mostly succeeded, and that Daniel was genuinely capable, and that was the problem. He said the genuinely capable ones were harder to read than the incompetent ones because they gave you so much real material to trust that you could miss what was underneath it. A pause. He said he had put everything he could think of into the foundation of the house and the company and the trust, and that he had to believe it was enough, and that you were enough, and that he was sorry he couldn't stay to find out. Emily sat in her father's chair in her father's study and felt the tears arrive, the ones she had been carrying since Tuesday night. The ones she had held back through the recordings and the documents and the board meeting and the boardroom and Marcus Webb's meeting and all the procedural machinery of justice. She had held them back because she had needed to, and now she let them come because she didn't have to hold them anymore, and they came the way long-held things always come, completely, and with a force that surprised her even though she had been expecting them. She cried for her father who had loved her and built her an architecture of protection and had not gotten to see her use it. She cried for the marriage she had believed in, and the man she had trusted, and the years of her life she had given to a story that was not what she thought it was. She cried for the version of herself who had stood at a bedroom door and felt the ground shift and had not fallen, who had gone downstairs and made phone calls at midnight and built something true out of something broken, and who had done all of that while carrying a grief that had nowhere to go because the moment had not yet allowed it. She cried for all of it. Charles Bennett waited on the phone. He did not rush her or fill the silence or say anything at all. He simply stayed on the line the way the oldest kind of friend can present without intruding, and she was grateful for it in a way that had no adequate words. When she was through, she said, "Thank you for calling, Charles." "Your father was right," Charles said simply. "It was enough. You were enough." She held the phone after the call ended and sat in the quiet study and felt the particular irreplaceable quality of being known by someone who had known the person who made you the continuity of love that stretches across the people who carry it forward. After a while, she washed her face and went back to work. The FBI meeting on Saturday morning lasted 3 hours. Special Agent Dorado was precise, prepared, and thorough, the kind of federal investigator who made his competence visible not through performance, but through the quality of his questions. He had reviewed Emily's documentation before she arrived. He had reviewed the financial records the warrant had produced. He had spoken with Vanessa Reed by phone the previous afternoon and scheduled a formal interview for the following week. "Based on what we have," Dorado said, "we're looking at wire fraud, money laundering, and breach of fiduciary duty. The Wyoming entity and the account in Barbara Whitmore's name introduce potential additional charges depending on what the cooperation interview produces." He paused. "Ms. Reed's testimony is going to be central to establishing intent. Without her, we have the money trail, but the intent narrative is harder to close. With her, the case is significantly stronger." "She'll cooperate fully," Emily said. "You seem certain." "She made a choice 2 days ago that was hard to make," Emily said. "People who make the hard choice once usually follow through." Dorado looked at her with the evaluating attention of someone whose job required reading people accurately. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, "in my experience, when a fraud investigation begins with the victim is usually in one of two states. Either they're emotionally compromised in ways that make the evidence gathering complicated, or they've processed the personal component separately, and they come in here ready to work." He paused. "You are very clearly in the second category. I want you to know that makes a significant difference to how this investigation proceeds." Emily looked at him. "My father was a businessman," she said. "He spent 40 years building something that was worth protecting. I learned from watching him that the personal component and the professional obligation are not separate things. They're the same thing. Protecting the company is personal. Ensuring accountability is personal. I did not separate them. I just made sure the personal part was in service of the right things." Dorado nodded. He wrote something down. "We'll be in touch," he said. She left the FBI field office and walked to her car and sat in it for a moment before starting the engine because she needed a moment to let the weight of the last 72 hours settle into something she could carry without it pressing on her breathing. 72 hours. She thought about Tuesday night, the plane, the long driveway, the laughing, the silk robe, the divorce papers and the transfer agreement, and the moment she had stood at the bedroom door and felt something move through her that she could not call by any ordinary name. She thought about this night in the study, the 4 shell companies and then the 5th, Martin Cole on the phone at 11 o'clock, Sarah Brennan's messages arriving in the dark, the security system panel and the 11 minutes it took to change the codes, the screen in every room of the house reading ownership authority reassigned. She thought about Patricia Huang arriving at 8:58 with her coat still on, about Howard Chen on the phone saying, "I voted against your father once," about Vanessa in the kitchen chair with her hands in her lap saying, "I thought I was," when Emily asked if she had loved him. She thought about the boardroom and Daniel saying no. She thought about washing her hands at the kitchen sink. She thought about Marcus Webb saying, "Let's make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." She thought about Charles Bennett on the phone and her father calling him the night before he passed, and the 40-minute conversation about a daughter he trusted more than he had ever let her fully know. She started the car. She drove home. 3 weeks after this board meeting, the independent audit was completed. The final figure was $5,408,000. The earlier estimate had missed a partial transfer in the fourth entity's final quarter. The audit report was submitted to the board, to the FBI, and to the Santa Clara County DA simultaneously, as Emily had requested, because she had decided early that transparency was not just the ethical choice, but the only choice that made the company worth protecting in the first place. The DA's office filed charges against Daniel Whitmore on a Wednesday morning, 9 days after the FBI completed its review of Vanessa Reed's cooperating testimony. Wire fraud, money laundering, breach of fiduciary duty. The charges were federal, which meant they carried weight that no amount of private settlement could reduce. Emily was in a board meeting when the news came through on her phone. She read the notification, set the phone face down on the table, and continued the meeting without mentioning it, because the meeting was about the company's new employee wellness program, and 3,000 people were waiting on the outcome. And that mattered more than whatever she was feeling in the moment about charges being filed against a man she had once planned to grow old with. After the meeting, she went to her car and sat in it for 5 minutes. She called Martin. "It's done," she said. "Yes," he said. "How long does something like this take?" she said. "The legal process." "Could be a year, could be 2, Martin said. "These things move slowly." "I know," she said. "Emily." Martin paused in his particular way. "How are you?" She thought about that honestly, the way she tried to think about everything now without performance, without the instinct to manage how she appeared to the people who cared about her. "I'm all right," she said. "I'm not happy about it, but I'm all right." "That's the correct answer," Martin said. "Robert used to say that all right is the most honest thing a person can be after something hard. Happy is too much, broken is too little. All right means you're still standing and you know it." She sat with that for a moment. "Martin," she said, "thank you for everything, for answering the phone at 11 o'clock, and for the trust provisions, and for the 38 years of this." A pause on his end. "Thank your father," Martin said, and she could hear something in his voice that was old and warm and not entirely steady. "He's the one who told me 30 years ago that the most important cases weren't the complicated ones. He said the most important ones were the ones where the right thing was clear, and the only question was whether you had the courage to do it." A beat. "I've been doing the right thing for your family for 30 years, Emily. It has been the privilege of my career." She drove home with her hands steady on the wheel and the city moving around her the way cities do, indifferent and alive, full of people carrying their own stories, none of them visible from the outside. 6 weeks after the board meeting, the corporate restructuring was complete. The new oversight provisions were extensive, and Emily knew would be described by some in the business press as overcautious as the reflex of a woman who had been burned and responded by building a wall. She did not mind being described that way. She had learned that the distance between overcautious and appropriately protected was most clearly visible in retrospect, and she intended to be proved right in retrospect rather than praised in the moment. Marcus Webb had settled into the interim CEO role with the natural efficiency of someone who had been doing the substance of that job for years. Without the title, and the early returns from the operations team were what Emily had expected. Relief, clarity, a loosening of something that had been held too tight for too long. She spent her time differently now. More time in the office, more time with department heads she had previously met, only in formal settings, learning the texture of the company's daily life, rather than its quarterly summaries. She walked the floors more. She ate lunch in the company cafeteria twice a week and sat with different people each time, because her father had told her once that the most important thing a company owner could do was eat where the employees ate, because that was the only place the real information lived. She thought about her father constantly in those weeks, more than she had since the months immediately after his death. She thought about him in the specific, detailed way of someone who has recently had occasion to test everything she learned from a person and has discovered with something that is both grief and gratitude that the lessons held. She thought about him saying, "I built you a house that will always know who it belongs to." She understood now that he had not been talking only about the security system. He had been talking about her. On a Tuesday evening, 7 weeks after the night that changed everything, Emily was sitting in the kitchen with a glass of the Cabernet. She had finally opened the anniversary bottle, the one she had imagined opening on the night she came home early from New York, and she was reading not for work, but simply reading a novel she had bought 3 months ago and never found the time to start. Her phone buzzed.
A message from a number she had not heard from in 7 weeks. Daniel.
She looked at his name on the screen for a long moment. She put the phone down. She picked up her wine. She went back to her book. 3 minutes later, something moved in her that was not unresolved and not avoidance, but simply a decision. The deliberate, considered choice of a woman who understood that some messages did not require a response, that silence was sometimes the most complete and honest thing you could offer, and that the space you chose not to fill with someone else's words was space that belonged to you. She did not read the message. She blocked the number. She went back to her book. Outside, the oak trees her mother had planted were doing exactly what they had always done. The house was quiet. The security system was set. The codes were ones that Daniel Whitmore did not know and would never know, and the screens inside were dark because there was nothing to announce, no authority to reassign, no invasion to identify. Everything in the house was exactly where it belonged. 2 months after the board meeting, Vanessa Reed called her. Emily almost didn't answer. She sat with the ringing phone in her hand and thought about what she owed this woman and what she didn't, and what it would cost her to have the conversation, and whether the cost was worth it. And she answered because she had decided early in this process that she would not let what Daniel Whitmore had done make her smaller than she was, and that closing herself to every complicated thing would have been its own kind of shrinking. "Emily," Vanessa said. "Vanessa," she said. A pause. "I've been asked to testify before the grand jury next month," Vanessa said. "I wanted you to know that I'm going to tell them everything, not because Agent Dorado asked me to, because it's true, and because people were hurt, and because—" She stopped, started again. "Because I need to be someone I can look at." Emily listened to the quality of that, the specific private accounting of a person deciding who they were going to be on the other side of a mistake. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry," Vanessa said. "I know I've said it before. I'll keep saying it until it means what it should mean." Emily sat with that. "Do what you need to do in that room," she said finally. "Tell the truth clearly and completely. That's the only apology that has any real weight." "I will," Vanessa said. "Good," Emily said. And then, because she was Emily Caldwell, and she had been raised by a man who believed that decency was not a resource that ran out when it was tested, but one that grew stronger in the exercise, "Take care of yourself, Vanessa." She ended the call and sat in the kitchen and thought about the strange, tangled web of a story that had begun with a laughing man and a silk robe and a $1 transfer agreement, and how many people's lives had moved differently because of a woman who had come home early from New York on a Tuesday, and decided that the appropriate response to having the ground shift beneath her was to understand the foundation better than anyone had ever given her credit for understanding it. She thought about what her father had said. "Your kindness was never your weakness. It was your strength. The mistake was giving that kindness to someone who wanted to use it." She understood that now in a way she had not fully understood it when he said it in the hospital holding her hand in the last careful weeks of his life. She understood that kindness given to someone who uses it was not wasted exactly. It was evidence. Evidence of who you were and what you were capable of and what you deserved. The waste was not in the giving. The waste was in staying after you knew what the giving had become. She had not stayed. She had left the bedroom and gone downstairs and made 11 minutes of phone calls and built a wall of truth so complete that not even the most gifted storyteller she had ever known could find a way through it. She finished her wine. She rinsed the glass and set it in the rack. She turned off the kitchen light. She walked through the house that had always known who it belonged to, and she turned off the lights room by room, and she went upstairs and she set her alarm for 6:15 and she lay down in the dark. Outside, the oak trees were exactly where they had always been. Inside the house was exactly what it had always been. And Emily Caldwell, the daughter of Robert Caldwell, the woman who had come home early from New York and found a laughing man and a silk robe and a $1 lie, and had responded by rebuilding the truth from the foundation, up-closed her eyes and slept without fear because she had done what needed doing, and the house knew who it belonged to, and so finally and completely, and for the first time in longer than she could measure, did she.